Hi class, Jolene here. We're going to learn how to create gradients. And to create a gradient, you need to use not only the gradient tool, but the gradient palette. And a third thing you need is the swatches palette. So they all have to be used together. So first I'm going to get out my swatches palette and I'm going to drag it out so that it stays visible. Notice that if I leave it in here and click on it, and then I get my gradient palette, which I'm going to go up here to get, right there, the gradient palette. Once I click on here, sometimes it'll make the swatches palette go away. So I just drag them both out so they can be used together. So we're going to start by creating a linear gradient. I'm going to click on this shape here, which as you can see right now is gray. But then I'm going to tell this gradient palette what kind of a gradient I want. So there's four main choices here. The ones you'll use the most often are this one that goes from white to black or black to white. This is another variation of that using a different color. And then this one called Fading Skies, where it goes from a color to transparent. So we'll take a look at all of those. And by the way, none of these colors in here matter. You can just choose one of them and as a starting point. So for instance, we'll start with this white to black. And now you can see that this, what was a green shape, has a white to black gradient in it. So I can, and you can also see that this is a linear gradient. Right here, I can change it to radial, which we'll talk about in a minute. But right now, we're going to stick with linear. And I want you to see how this gradient palette works. So you have these little icons here. I'll call them houses because they look like a little house. And they're on a slider. So you can see if I move this slider over, how it is affecting this gradient. I can use this middle slider to determine how dramatically the gradient fades in or out. I can move this one over and you can see how it affects the gradient. I'll move this back over now and move this to the center so we have a smooth gradient from white to black. Now I could add other colors to this. That's why I have my swatches palette open. Say I want to add yellow, I can just drag yellow up and now I have yellow between the two. You can add another one. Can add blue in there. So now I have a gradient that goes from white to yellow, blue to black. The same way that I can add them, I can remove them by clicking and dragging. So now I just have a gradient with these three colors. Another way you can control the gradient is the direction that it goes in. Right now, it's going left to right, but here's where I can use my gradient tool, which is right here. I can click on it or I can select the letter, type the letter G for the shortcut. So you can see it put a bar in here. And that bar, when you hover over it, you can see it's the exact same bar as over here. So I can actually control those sliders from right within my object. All these sliders I can control. The other thing I can do with this is control how the gradient behaves. So for instance, if I click and drag going vertically, I'll hold down Shift to make that a straight line. Now the gradient is going vertical instead of horizontal. I'll move that up. If you can drag it different ways, so now you can barely see the blue because it's below the shape. So move it back up there. You can also do it diagonally. Click and drag from here to here. The shorter I make this, let's drag that in. We drag again, I'll just drag from here to here. It makes it more intense. If I drag from way outside, much less intense. So you can see you can do drag in many different ways to create linear gradients. Now let's take a look at a radial gradient. we'll use this circle to do it, but you could put a radial gradient in any shape. Same thing with a linear gradient. So let's go over here and let's choose this yellow-orange here. And all you can see, it comes built in with a lot of variations of this color. Remember, you can click and drag them off if you want to, or add more colors by clicking on the swatches and dragging it up in there. So let's make this a radial by just clicking here. And now you can see we have the same thing except that it's radial instead of linear. You can move these around. You can also use the palette to change where those circles happen within, where those radials happen within this particular shape. So that is radial and linear gradients.